Okay, we are starting the streaming now. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the webinar on biodiversity, governance, management, and awareness, a webinar series in real sense for next 3 days. And on these 3 days, we will be dealing with 3 specific topics. First of all, let me wish you all a very happy World Environment Day. We put this webinar together in just about 1 week's time, and I'm very happy that we have a very illustrious panel to be on this webinar and talk on and debate on some of the interesting key topics. Today, we will be discussing the implementation of biodiversity laws and rules. And before that, let me just give a brief house rules that we have 4 members who would be speaking. The first one would be speaking is the keynote speaker. The keynote speaker has about 15 minutes, and in case keynote speaker speaks for a less time, then the first panel speaker will get the time available or the leftover by the keynote speaker, and the remaining 3 panel speakers will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes. If there are any burning questions, we will take those questions immediately, but otherwise the questions and answer session will be left for at the end of the session. So we think that we will cover all 4 talks in about 50 to 60 minutes, and therefore we would have around 30 minutes for question and answer session. Today we have an illustrious panel. I'm so pleased and happy to have the chairman of the National Biodiversity Authority, Dr. Vinod Mathur, as a first keynote speaker on this very important topic of implementation of biodiversity law and rules. Vinod and me, our interaction goes back around 25 years. Vinod, I just did some calculation. And it seems that as if we have met yesterday, and we still are talking with the same enthusiasm about the different biodiversity topics. Vinod requires no introduction, but just to complete the formality, Vinod is an IFS officer of 1983 batch. He did his PhD from University of Oxford. He has spent 33 illustrious years at nation's one of the key biodiversity and wildlife research organization and conservation organization, the Wildlife Institute of India. He was helm of the affair as a dean from 2005 till 2014. And in 2014 till August 31st, 2019, Vinod became the director of the Wildlife Institute of India. And I had a good fortune to interact at WII. And this man does not had 1 day gap between the 2 services. So on 31st evening, he superannuated as the director of WII. But on first morning, he was right there in Delhi to charge of the nation's custodian, if I can call, the National Biodiversity Authority. And in last 8-9 months that Vinod is at the helm of the affairs of the NBA, NBA has rejuvenated itself. The activities of NBA has been multifold, and they have been moving from a snail speed to absolutely a 100-meter dash, but with a tenacity to have a marathon run. A lot of initiative, and I think there could not have been any other speaker for us other than Vinod to kickstart the discussions on biodiversity, implementation of biodiversity laws and rules, especially given in the context of the National Biodiversity Mission, the PBR, the COVID pandemic, and the evolving world in the pandemic. And we very much appreciate, Vinod, you joining at the shortest possible time. I know that how busy your schedule are. You love to work at 33,000 feet. And equally, during the pandemic time, the number of meetings that you held during the pandemic time of NBA, of NBA, I think probably sets an example and reaches the bar higher for the other government offices. So with those keywords, with those few words of introduction, the floor is yours, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you, Vishwas. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am audible and clear?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So at the outset and on the occasion of the World Environment Day, I would like to convey my best wishes to all of you on behalf of the National Biodiversity Authority and of course on my own behalf. I must begin by complimenting the organizers, particularly one and only one, Dr. Vishwas Chavan, who has conceived of this idea of having a series of webinars. And these webinars also become more relevant because if you know and go back to the theme of this year's celebration, the theme itself is biodiversity. So there can be no better way to celebrate the theme by having a string of seminars on biodiversity and all aspects of it. And it is very evident that he has been very successful in not only having me here today, a large number of eminent experts, both nationally and internationally. So we have a good lineup in Dr. Bawa from US and Dr. Jeet Singh joining us from Germany. And there are many others who are willing and waiting to join as a participant or as a resource person. Now, obviously, when you do so many things, the agenda becomes very tight and it becomes very, very elaborate. So when Vishwas talked to me, obviously I had to say yes, which I did, but I did not bother to check that on what aspects I would be required to speak. Because when it comes to Biological Diversity Act, which is in I am in the custody of the Act, relationship is only about 8 or 9 months old. And a lot of things are happening in the Act, in the authority, but the two champions who are managing that are also present as panelists today. Mr. Goyal, who is going to speak after me, and Dr. Ramesh, or Mr. Ramesh, the person with a very erudite legal mind. These are the people who are dealing with that, the amendments in the Biological Diversity Act. I can only say that the Act has been in place since 2002, but there are very many things which need to be fixed. So the other thing is when Vishwas was giving a briefing to all of us, he said no slides, do a freewheeling discussion. And that is what I'm going to do. I can see the smile on Goyal Saab's face as well, because everybody gets relieved when you are not bound by a slide. So this is going to be a kind of an open, thought-provoking session. So what the story I'm trying to weave is that on my very first week when I joined in NBA, when I met the minister, he said, I will say what he said in Hindi, Mathur साहब अभी आप जाइए 4-5 महीने काम करिए सारी चीजें हैं जो हमें देखनी है और आयुष जो हमारा मंत्रालय है वो आपसे बहुत नाखुश है. So that was the message he gave me. And when I went to call upon the secretary, he says, Dr. Mathur, you come from a research fraternity. I don't have to tell you, but I must say that the research fraternity is also unhappy. So these were my starting points. And when I reached NBA, when I started looking at things, then I was told that the ministry has already constituted an expert committee under the chairmanship of Mr. Goyal, and there are some very eminent members, and as I said, Mr. Ramesh is also part of that. So, more as a learning rather than contributing, I have been participating in these discussions, and I will not steal the thunder from both Mr. Goyal and Mr. Ramesh, and they would do most of the talking that how they have now shaping the new act. Of course, we cannot satisfy everybody, but we have to be logical and we have to be consistent. Two things definitely are there. We have to also be in line with the current thinking of the government. And if I can explain that in 2 sentences, the government is saying we must have ease of doing business. So that is one line which is enough. You can interpret it any way, but that is what has been the attempt, and I'm very sure my colleagues are going to explain what they are trying to do over there. And obviously, now comes my own scientific understanding. In the last 18 to 20 years, a large number of things, the way we define biodiversity, the way we define breeding, the way we define a value-added product, the way we define conventional breeding, all these things have taken a change. So we must also be also alive to this responsibility. Same thing is happening in research. If you know, of course, I would say first as director or as former director WII, I was also encouraging my scientists that they should collaborate. And with whom you would collaborate? Obviously, you will collaborate with the best in the world, whether he is an Indian or whether he is a foreign national or whether he works in an Indian institution or whether he works in a scientific institution. Now, this was my thought, and here is what, when I come to NBA, when I start looking at how research permissions are granted, then suddenly I am told that as per the law, this is possible, this is not possible, this will mean this, and if you are collaborating with a foreign institution or a foreign university, then these are the kind of regulations which are there. Well, I do believe that as a regulatory authority and as a chairperson of the National Biodiversity Authority, I do have a mandate and an onus and a responsibility to see that we function as an environmental regulator at the apex level. But that is only one part of the story. Being regulator and telling everybody what others have to do and punishing everybody, taking them to a civil court. I was also told that we have a quasi-judicial function, which I was very amused to hear that what kind of judicial powers do I have. The point I'm making is that these rules have been framed with some 20 years ago with certain things in mind. And now the things have grown. Now no research cannot proceed without collaboration. And obviously you have to collaborate with your peers, whether they exist in Pennsylvania or whether they exist in Sri Lanka. You need to look at that. And that is what we are now trying to align our rules, regulations, and so on and so forth. So I will, this part of the story, I will stop here. And as I said, I will request Mr. Goyal and Mr. Ramesh to take it over. But I have few other things to talk. When you are talking of governance, now governance operates at 2 levels. governance at the international level, and governance at the national level. And obviously, both levels have to be in tune with each other. Now, I would be spending a few minutes on both. And when we talk of international governance, obviously the story goes back to 1972 first, then it goes back to 1992, and actually 1992, when at the global level, we formed the Convention on Biological Diversity. And since 1993, when India became a signatory, till today, a lot of things have happened. Most countries or all countries are part of this convention, excepting, as you have rightly guessed, the United States of America. So it has implications at the global level. While you are interacting with the US on 9 out of 10 things, when it comes to a legal position, then you are told that US is not a part of the treaty, yet it will like everything to be done as per its whims and fancies, if I can say so. So these are some of the issues at the global level. And one more organization which I would like to speak upon is the IBIS, or the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is of a recent origin, 2012 I'm talking. 4 UN agencies, the UNDP, the UNEP, the UNESCO, and the FAO have come together with a mandate. And the mandate is very clear: do global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I'm stressing upon the word ecosystem services because in the last 20 years or 15 years, while we were talking about biodiversity, we never exclusively talked about ecosystem services. So here is an entity, here is an organization which has done 2 recent assessments, a global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services and a regional assessment of the biodiversity and ecosystem services, of which we as a Pacific are part. This is interesting. Indian scientists, I and your own colleagues have participated in that, and it has given us certain key messages. And these messages are that we are confronted with huge levels of extinctions in near future. There is an assessment, disagree or you may like to modify it, but we are saying that 1 million species are what are affected and so forth. So this entity has given us an assessment at the global level, and I would say that being a scientific entity, by and large, it has been able to pay the assessments in the right manner. But then, this is what is the difficult part. When we look at these global biodiversity assessments, our decision maker, our focal point in the ministry, when he reads the report or she reads the report, they say, what is there for us, for India? Now we start looking at biodiversity governance, not at the global level, not at the regional level, but we start look at the national level, at the subnational level, and at the local level. Now this is where the role of the National Biodiversity Authority is coming up, which I'm going to explain in a minute, that as an apex regulator, the National Biodiversity Authority is at the top, followed by the state biodiversity boards, and followed by the biodiversity management committees. Now, in the why we are able to move ahead with the local governance of biodiversity, what are the factors which are affecting us, why we have not been able to set up these biodiversity management committees, and as you know, one most important function of the BMC is the People's Biodiversity Register. So these registers have been were supposed to be made since the Act came into being, but they have not been. And that is where my recent relationship with Vishwas came into picture, that we started looking at that what ails the problem and why is that we are not able to make, and even if we make it, how we are going to use it if they continue to retain a paper document. And that is where this idea came, that we must have a total electronic framework, total electronic structure, taking into account whatever best practices are there in governance, whatever best practices are there in data management, data quality, data security. We are all aware of those issues, but this is what we are trying to do. And I would say that coming from me today on the World Environment Day, I want to give a promise that very soon we would be able to fix up what the situations are with respect to the management committees first, and then the People's Biodiversity Register. The last thing I want to say, and again, thanks now to Dr. Kamal Baba, he's also here in the group, that our country has decided to launch a new mission. It is going into a mission mode, and there is a Prime Minister's Council for Science, Technology and Innovation. This council has decided to make 9 new missions. The 9 missions, if you like to know the names, are all very esoteric, from quantum physics, mechanics to artificial intelligence. But nesting in these 9 missions is the mission on biodiversity and human well-being. And that is what I want to share with all our listeners, that this mission is in a very advanced stage of consideration, and we are now looking and formulating and with the approvals that this national mission on biodiversity will be the first such mission in independent India, and it should be a music to the ears of the biodiversity community, that when we talk of governance, management, monitoring, all these things will be looked into that. Already the component and blueprints are there, and this framework that I talked about, the electronic framework for PBR, forms an important part. And lastly, this COVID pandemic with which we are dealing for the last 6 months, I must share with you that almost 12 months ago or 18 months ago, when the formulation of the mission started, we were aware that there has to be a very important component, what we call as One Health. The health of the domestic animal, the health of the human, the health of the wild animal are interrelated. So I'm very pleased to say that there will be a very strong component of One Health in it, so that maybe right now we have been caught napping with COVID-19 pandemic, and there is no guarantee that there will be no other pandemic in future. But we will be better prepared. We will be having better wherewithal for us to deal. So with these words, Vishwas, I will stop here. There is endlessly you can go on these issues, but there is a time for everything. And you did say that if there is some time saved, I don't know whether at least I must have saved a minute or two, and I want to offer to my next speaker, because he has very important things to say. So over to you, Vishwas. It has been a pleasure talking to you and our friends today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. This has been an amazing insight, and the latest from the key player in the Indian biodiversity. So thank you very much. And I knew very much that once we kickstart and we have a keynote speech started by you, the level of the discussions would rise to a completely higher level. To take it forward on the biodiversity implementation of biodiversity law and rules, we have Anil Kumar Goyal. Anil is the IFS officer of 1981 batch from the Kerala cadre. Goyalji comes with 39 years of experience in forestry and biodiversity. He has been the Joint Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and then the Special Secretary to the Panchayati Raj. And it's very interesting. I mean, the BMCs and the development of PBR is something envisaged that the Panchayat level it will happen, and therefore he is one who brings experience from the forestry conservation to administering the biodiversity, and then the Panchayati Raj work in the Panchayati Raj Ministry. Shri Goyal is also the chair of the NBA's expert committee on looking into the potential amendments or modifications or changes into the Biological Diversity Act 2002 that Vinod rightly referred. He is also the board member of the Andrew Yule and Company Limited. So, and most important thing, Anil, that I always like is the simplicity with which you come and the friendliness with which you come. There is no iota of being an cadre officer, which sometimes we all have brushed with. I must also tell that to this webinar, we have more than 1,200 registrations. Currently, the webinar is going live. We will come to know how many joined. Because there are 1,200, we could not have all 1,200 into the same frame. So therefore, we have selectively invited people to be on this interactive platform. The recorded versions will be shared to those who have not received it. But I'm very excited to listen to Goyalji about what is happening in terms of bringing the Biological Diversity Act in tune with the current scenario. So platform is yours. I guess you have about 10 to 12 minutes available with you.
Thank you, Dr. Vishwas. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I wish you all happy World Environment Day. I thank Dr. Vishwas for inviting me to share my experiences on the topic, the challenges in adapting biodiversity laws, rules, and regulations based on implementation experience. After a brief introduction of the biodiversity laws in India, I would like to explain how much time-consuming is the process of making laws and still further complicated of the process of making amendments to these acts based on the feedback from the stakeholders. As we know from our Vedas, 3,000 to 4,000 years old, Indians traditionally and culturally respect nature and natural resources. We worship nature, we worship rivers, mountains, trees, we worship people, but, and we may recall the Kejri movement of 1730, in which in Rajasthan, where 363 people sacrificed their lives to save Kejri trees, Prosopicena area. And Bishnois are also famous for protecting black buck and nilgais. Kejri movement was forebear of our recent 1970s Chipko movement, initiated by Sundarlal Bahuguna and Chandi Prakash Bhatt in Uttar Pradesh. We have more than 1 lakh sacred groves of various sizes preserved by the local people based on their religious and cultural beliefs, and nothing is allowed, no extractions are allowed from these areas. So trees are powerful symbols of growth, death, and rebirth for all we Indians. Indians are also famous for adopting 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. We find many funny videos based on this practice, and we don't leave a thing unless it becomes totally useless. We have a number of sectoral biodiversity related laws. We have laws on forest and wildlife, agriculture laws are different, marine biodiversity laws are different. Our first interaction with the laws with the forest, it started with the appointment of Dr. Brandis at the first Inspector General of India Inspector General of Forest in India in 1864, and our first Indian Forest Act came in 1865, although the objective of that act was something different. But slowly over the years, all the laws have been oriented towards conservation and sustainable use. Then we had law of Indian Forest Act of 1878, then 1927. We have 3 old policies of national forest policies of 1894, 1952, and 1988. And I'm told that latest revised national forest policy is also on the anvil. Subject of forest and wildlife, which was there in the state list, was brought to concurrent list of Constitution of India in 1976. And to protect and improve nature and environment, those have been made part of fundamental duties of every citizen. We have Wildlife Protection Act, Forest Conservation Act, Environment Protection Act. Under Environment Protection Act, we have special rules for coastal regulation zone, which tell us about conserving marine biodiversity. Our environmental clearances, there is important environment impact assessment where biodiversity impact is a major component. We have PESA Act of 1996 and Forest Rights Act of 2006, which specifically enjoin duties on local people to conserve forest, wildlife, and natural resources. Similarly, in the agriculture sector, we have Seed Act, we have Protection of Plant Varieties, Farmers Act, Plant Quarantine Order, and so on. So we'll see that we have a number of sectoral biodiversity related laws. UN Convention on Biological Diversity signed in 1992 is the first such convention which addresses cross-sectoral biodiversity related issues. To give effect to the objectives, its objective, India being party to CBD enacted Biological Diversity Act in 2002 after a decade of spade work. This legislation is in addition to and not in derogation to the provisions of various related laws on forest and wildlife. Similarly, we have Environment Policy of 2006, which is also based on cross-sectoral linkages. Biodiversity in forest is affected by the actions in other sectors too, whether those are intended actions or unintended actions. Therefore, policies in all sectors need to consider implications on biodiversity and integrate appropriate measures if biodiversity is to be conserved in the long term. As already explained by Dr. Mathur, we have institutions at 3 levels: National Biodiversity Authority, State Biodiversity Boards, and BMCs, through which these provisions of Biological Diversity Act are being implemented. Almost all earlier legislations take care of first 2 objectives of BD Act, that is conservation and sustainable use. This is the first of its kind legislation which has 3rd objective of fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising out of use of biological resources. India had no previous experience of implementing this 3rd mandate, and it has challenged the business as usual which was going on in India, utilizing biological resources occurring in India by various stakeholders in sectors including seed, cosmetics, biotechnology, research, and IUs. There have been there is lack of clarity in some of the provisions of the Biological Diversity Act regarding their applicability or otherwise to a particular sector, and absence of regulations on access and benefit sharing in the initial years of implementation of the Act, which has created a lot of implementation issues. Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing was negotiated in 2010, which came into force in 2012. And our regulations on ABS in India only were formulated in November 2014. These regulations have raised a number of interpretational and implementation issues highlighted by various stakeholders, including state biodiversity boards. State biodiversity boards are the most important institutions at the state level which are implementing the provisions of the law. For the last 15 to 16 years, a number of issues have been brought to the attention of Ministry as well as National Biodiversity Authority, and many have gone at the higher political levels also. Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change, and NBA also organized a number of consultations on with various stakeholders to solicit their views as to how this can be simplified. In the last 2 years, Ministry and NBA constituted 4 expert committees to look into these issues and make suggestions for amendments to address these challenges. Now I'll come to the process for approval. The draft regulations, the draft ABS regulations suggested by the committee were put on the website of the NBA for comments from the public. Those comments received were analyzed and appropriately incorporated in the draft. The revised draft ABS regulations were approved by the National Biodiversity Authority, and those were submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Forest. After those are approved by the Ministry of Environment and Forest, those are sent to the Ministry of Law for vetting, and once vetting is done, those are notified. And I am told good progress has been achieved in this regard, and I think the committee and NBA has done good justice to simplify those laws for the ease of doing business. Now we come to biodiversity, biodiversity rules. Based on stakeholder consultations, the committee suggested some modifications in the rules. These rules are based on the existing provisions of the law, and there is not much scope in making those amendments. So whatever was possible, those amendments were proposed by the committee. And here also process is not so cumbersome. Those are to be approved by the authority, then approved by the ministry, and after those are vetted by the Ministry of Law, those can be notified. Now comes the amendments to the Biological Diversity Act, the most difficult, long drawn and cumbersome process. After recommendations on the draft amendments by the committee, those are to be approved by the National Biodiversity Authority. And after those are submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Ministry has to approve those in principle. Then those will be uploaded on the website of the Ministry or the NBA for public comments. After public comments are received, those are again to be analyzed by a committee and appropriately incorporated. Again, that draft will go to the Ministry. Ministry, if required, they may have interministerial consultations. And then draft amendment bill is prepared by the Ministry of Law. Then the next process is preparation of cabinet note. Then that cabinet note has to be approved by the cabinet. Then it has to be introduced in the parliament. And parliament of two houses has to be approved by two houses. And if there are issues which are not sorted out, then that is referred to the parliamentary committee for detailed deliberations and recommendations. If the committee is recommending some changes, again that process is to be repeated, that there will be amendments in the draft bill that has to be approved by the cabinet. Again, it has to be introduced in the parliament. So generally the process should be, first you amend the law, then you amend the rules, then you amend the regulations. But keeping in view that it takes a lot of time, the ministry decided to go through the other route. That wherever there are issues which do not need amendments to the Act, those can be simply taken up and those can be suggested for amendments to the regulations and rules. We have experience of amendments to Indian Forest Act, which were started in 1990s, and after 30 years of spade work, I do not think any progress has been achieved. So you can imagine how difficult is the process of amendment to the law. And I have personal experience of amendments to the PESA Act, that is provision of extension of provisions of to scheduled areas, Panchayati Raj provisions. That process also started in 2008, and as of date, nothing has happened. Those are also buried in some files. To conclude, I would like to mention that government has all good intentions to ensure ease of doing business and address concerns of all stakeholders, but because of complicated and long drawn procedures, as Vinod also has said, it's not possible to please everyone. Challenges remain in adapting biodiversity laws based on implementation experience. I'll tell you, the committee has done good justice to ensure that business is facilitated without compromising the objectives of the Act. I would like to thank Dr. Vishwas and the organizers and listeners for their patience and attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anil ji. That was a thorough insight into the legislation process. And it appears for some of us into the field that why is this taking so much of time? And I think after what Goyal ji has shared with us, it should become clear that legislating and putting it into practice is far more difficult. I have a next speaker on the panel who is a good friend. We haven't met often, but we have kept touch with each other's work through the social media and within the network of biodiversity. I proudly invite Dr. M.K. Ramesh. He's professor at the National Law School of India, University in Bangaluru, holds BSc, LLM from Mysore University, 38 years of experience in teaching law. He at once was a tax officer. And that, Ramesh, has caught my attention, that next time do I have any difficulties, I must come back to you. But also, Ramesh has not only practiced law, taught law, but he has also created 3 centers of excellence in law. And 2 of them are related to environmental law. And one of his center is called Environmental Law Clinic. And that's something is also very interesting to hear, that there requires to be a law clinic as well. So I won't be standing much between you and Ramesh. Ramesh, you have about 8 minutes or so, 8 to 10. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Vishwas. Thanks for a wonderful introduction. It is a wonderful way of celebrating the World Environment Day. My compliments to you and the other organizers, Amit and Aparna and the entire team. I feel really privileged to be in the very distinguished panel. The other members having spent a lifetime in steering and evolving the policy, the law and its working, not just on biodiversity, but on everything concerning environment. And I, being a law academic, I have a ringside view. Although for a little while, for about a term, I was also a member of the National Biodiversity Authority. And so from a little close quarters, I know how things are functioning, or what are the problems or ailments in relation to governance concerning biological diversity. I just would like to be doing a little bit of a reality check in the entire scenario, not just of the domestic law, but both the international and the national law concerning this. And I'm quite sure the people who are sharing the panel with me, Dr. Goyal Saab and others, they know me so well, and so there is no question of they mistaking me, because I'm always known for speaking plainly and calling a spade a spade. And the intentions are essentially to make it work and work better than what it is right now. The first part is, of course, celebration of biodiversity, which anyway we needed to do. The second one is a bit of stock taking and a kind of a performance audit, and where we are and where we intend to go. Celebration, yes, we need to celebrate biodiversity framework law and its working, both at the international level and at the domestic level, for the obvious reason that CBD, to start with, is a very unique legal document. The language is quite different. Nothing imperious about it or imperative in its nature. It's anchored to the cooperation amongst nations, and it is supposed to be the collective commitment of the largest group of nations at that time. Along with the climate change negotiations, this perhaps holds the fort as being the one which had the largest of subscriptions. And so it actually kindles hope that this is raising to the level of a peremptory norm of international law. It's something else also to celebrate, that it makes common cause of common concern, displays determination of community of nations to remain committed to conserve, protect, sustain life, and develop an equitous legal order. It's a celebration of life, life forms, ecosystems, and life support. It values life, recognizes the status, contributions, creates rights, and ensures reward, and sovereign nations exercise the right and enforce them. A visionary legal document encapsulating the principle of environmentally sustainable development, not just sustainable development, addressing concerns of conservation and demands of development. Turn to Indian law, it's in no way less. I would rather place it as a very unique law, a techno-legal document. It deepens democracy, and Goyal Saab would agree with me, it steals a march over the 73rd and 74th Amendment of the Constitution, confers a statutory status to a unit of the local body, Biodiversity Management Committee. The institutional arrangements that you have, both of NBA and SBB, and we are privileged to have the chairman with us in the delivering the keynote here. It's something which is truly democratic. I have seen it both in spirit and its functioning. All decisions are made through the committees that it has. And what does the committees contain? It's composed of and drawn from long-standing experience and expertise wrapped in a democratic attire. Arguably, the first Indian law to recognize and reward communitarian claims and interest over resources, associated knowledge, practices and traditions and custodial care. Truly Indian in spirit. Certainly, it actually takes away the colonial yoke of the notion of eminent domain and brings in the community into the whole scheme of things here. It gets to the core of corporate social responsibility far more than and deeper than the Companies Act could ever imagine. And in terms of the content and the context, as we already know, that it's common between the CBD and the National Biodiversity Law. Both actually share the concern, the conservation concern, in situ and ex situ conservation, very much concerned about the laws and how to recover and restore the traditions, the knowledges and practices, nurturing and conserving varieties of life and life forms. It's concerned about piracy, and so it's not ordinary theft, violation of sovereign right. And it's very much concerned about inequity, and so provides the legal design as to how you are going to ensure equity in sharing of benefits. Now, in terms of the content, you have the CBD and the two protocols at the international level, and we have our domestic law with the rules. Come to the reality check. If you just look at the international prescriptions, huge
it seems Ramesh's connection have frozen. Well, hold on for a moment or two.
Yes,
Till he, yeah, he's back.
He's back.
Go ahead. I think it has frozen again. One more time. Okay. I think we were reaching at a pretty exciting moment that Ramesh was trying to make a comparison between the international laws and the Indian law. I hope he is able to come back again. Is one of my colleagues going to give him a call and check if it is going to be back? But we will move forward, and this is sometimes technology take you for a ride. So I would move forward and request the next panelist. I met him a couple of months back, but we clicked immediately. Son of Sirsa in Haryana, who had his education in Hisar, BSc in agriculture and MSc in agriculture from Indian Agricultural Resources Research Institute, officer of the Indian Forest Service cadre 1987, Maharashtra cadre. Jeet Singh ji is the member secretary of the Maharashtra State Biodiversity Board. And in the real sense, he is the one who actually comes into helm of affair when it comes to implementing the biodiversity laws and rules. And therefore, we thought that the discussion would not be complete until we have the member secretary of the nation's one of the most progressive state, and therefore where there are a lot of pressures on biodiversity in more than one way, to share his experience of implementing the biodiversity rules and laws. So, Jeet Singh ji, the floor is yours for next 7 to 8 minutes. And in between, if we have Ramesh coming up, then we will request Ramesh to complete his remainder part after your talk is done. So, floor is over to you, Jeet Singh ji.
Good evening to all of you. First of all, I wish a very happy Environment Day to all of you, because today's topic, as all of you know, is the implementation of the Biodiversity Act and its rules. And I am a member secretary of the Maharashtra Biodiversity Board. The entire responsibility of implementation of the Act, I think 80% falls on the boards as well as the BMCs only. So in that regard, I will just discuss few things that how the implementation is taking place regarding the Biodiversity Board.
Hello.
If we see the implementation of the biodiversity laws and rules, I think the biodiversity richness of our country is very well known. We are one of the hotspot. We have 8% global biodiversity regarding the floral, faunal, microbial biodiversity, importance for its human survival, and danger of genetic engineering in bioresources. You know, the importance of genetic engineering in the bioresources has become very important because people are playing with biodiversity. So unless we protect our biodiversity, unless we know our biodiversity, unless we map it properly, make use of it properly, there is a danger that somebody may use our biodiversity and it can become dangerous to the entire society. So in this regard, Biodiversity Act of 2002, you know, has come after CBD negotiations and everything conventions. And this act basically has a sense of three things. It has conservation of bioresources, sustainable use, and equitable sharing. And mechanism for this Biodiversity Act is ABS and levy by BMCs. As far as the first two implementation part, the conservation of bioresources and its sustainable use, I think we were well aware, and it was in our practice right from many years that we were conserving and making use as far as it is rejuvenatable, or as far as we could use it again and again. But this concept of equitable sharing is totally new. At least it has come only after the Biodiversity Act, that the sharing also of the resources and the knowledge associated with has to be made with the local people. And this, the mechanism evolved for this is ABS and levy by the BMCs. Now, how this mechanism is working, for this we have to map the resources. And mapping, the entire responsibility of mapping the resources is coming with the biodiversity management committees, which has scientific community, if they can support to them, aware citizens are there, who can support the BMCs for mapping their resources. And there is a provision of technical support groups at district level, at biodiversity management committee levels. But unfortunately, the thing is that our committees, biodiversity management committees, in majority, at least most of them, lack empowerment, lack resources, lack the knowledge, or unless they are given hand holding in the initial stage, they are unable to map their resources. This is where we are finding the difficulty. That's why various courts, NGT is coming up heavily upon biodiversity boards and BMCs. Why are you not mapping your resources? Why are you not making your PBRs ready? And that's why, as Dr. Mathur as well as Vishwas Chavan was telling, that we are coming to the digital platform now, that once we map our resources, it can be reutilized, it can be rechecked, and people can really know that how much they have mapped and how much they have not been able to map. So next question, the difficulty in the implementation. The bioresources are managed by different organizations, as we know. that it is not a domain of one organization, that we have made the Biodiversity Act and now it will be implemented. Now major resources, bioresources are with different organizations. It can be agriculture department, animal husbandry, fishery, forest, private citizen, all the local people, they are having resources and they are managing the bioresources. But the difficulty is that when we know that why these resources are not being conserved, our agriculture has different targets, our animal husbandry, fishery, or every department, they are being governed by their own rules and by their own policies, and their policies are involving that there should be some returns, market demands, they have only those policies are followed. And I think the concept of conservation, the concept of biodiversity, the concept of diversity is not followed to the extent it deserves in various fields related to these various components of the biodiversity. And that's why implementation, still we have come from 2002 to 2020, almost 18 years, and still we are at the stage of mapping of resources, and we have not been able to much concentrate on implementation of the Biodiversity Act to the tune of implementation in real resource management. So I think slowly and slowly we will certainly come to that stage also. Now, what are the solutions for implementation of the Biodiversity Act? There, as Dr. Vinod Mathur was telling, that there is a need of biodiversity mission. Unless something is taken in the form of the mission, it becomes very difficult, that because the targets are not measurable. We do not know that how much has been done and how much not been done. We know our resources, we know our various biodiversity resources, but how much we have conserved, how much we have made use of them, and where are the threat perceptions, how they can be combated. These are the things which will be coming in our biodiversity mission, and that soon I think we be released at the national level, and surely we will have measurable targets, measurable yardsticks for management of our resources. And the second thing that comes for solution is awareness creation. As I was telling, that our resources are not being given the credit which they deserve. Our biodiversity, our products, which are our local products, AC products, they are still being considered inferior. So we do not have the publicity for their nutritional values, health benefits, support to the custodians, because those people who are custodians, they are not getting any support from various sources, even from the government. They are because the support various department of the government is also for hybrids, for high yielding, for high returns, but the less attention is being paid to the inherent value of the resources. So that's why this publicity at very large level is very, very essential. Only then we shall be able to publicize our resources, and they will get due credit and they will be conserved in a proper manner. And the last thing that I will say is that they need a place of pride. They need a pride for what they deserve, pride, and some leverage at every level. See, earlier, right, a few days back, yoga was also considered a localized resource, a localized exercise limited to some yogis, some rishis. Now, at the international level, only because of the place it has been given, it has become popular. So similarly, if our resources are also publicized, they will also get the due respect that they deserve, and our people who are custodian, they will conserve it properly, and there won't be any problem in their conservation, sustainable use, and equitable sharing also. Equitable sharing is also not being understood properly by various sources from where it has to be shared. So that is also a big problem in the implementation of the Biodiversity Act. I hope that slowly now efforts are being made, and at the national, state level also we are trying our best that we can implement and we can convince everybody that it is for the benefit of the society, it is for the benefit of the humankind. With all these words, I thank you all, and particularly Shri Vishwas Chavan ji for giving this opportunity of sharing my views at this esteemed platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeet Singh ji. That was something that needed to come forward, that laws are there. There are real issues with regards to implementation. You have put them very succinctly, and there could not have been anybody else from the state's perspective to put it that succinctly. Before we take the questions, we missed Ramesh due to technical fault, and that's how technology takes us for a ride. That's what Ramesh I said. So we'll give a floor to Ramesh for next 2 minutes or so to finish his thoughts, and then we will come back to the question and answer sessions. So Ramesh, over to you. Ramesh, you need to unmute your microphone. No, you are not audible, Ramesh.
Now can you?
Yes, you are audible. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. It's a really a humbling feeling, getting used to the technology. Okay, let me hurry things through and complete whatever that I had to convey. I was just referring to the time that's taken in working on the nuts and bolts aspects of the international legal arrangement. And this is something which is inexplicable for the simple reason that there was a clear commitment on the part of the nations to conserve, to prevent piracy, and to ensure the degradation and the loss of species and varieties of plants and animals and ecosystems. And you also have the problem of international monitoring or enforcement mechanism not that very strong, and not one of the strong points of this body of law to ensure compliance, and it compares poorly with the other international legal arrangements of the similar kind. And in terms of the aberrations in this arrangement, it's almost blind to parallel international legal developments that made inroads.
Okay, it seems we have lost Ramesh again, but yeah, Ramesh, are you back?
I think he will join in a moment.
Okay. So I would move forward and open the floor for discussions, and in the course of discussions, Ramesh could put his thoughts that the left incomplete. I would probably start requesting with Professor Kamal Bawa to kickstart his thought on all of the 4 presentations, and you are integral part of the national biodiversity missions, or rather I should say so, in early days, one of the key champions, and someone who has exposure to both the rules and regulations here in India as well as in the United States and other parts of the world. So and the other reason is that you are the most freshest individual amongst us. It's early morning for you there in the United States of America. So I think the question should come from you, or the thoughts or views. So over to you, Kamal.
Well, first of all, thank you all. And it has been a very, very rich discussion. A lot of material has been presented. And maybe I'll just start with a comment / question. I think one of the major issues in terms of the biodiversity laws is how do you define in quotes ownership of resources, because biodiversity is distributed. Distribution of biodiversity is a very, very, very complex issue. You know, you have communities. Resources are not distributed according to the way, we define communities, their geographies, and so on and so forth. So I'm not sure, how this issue is going to be dealt with in terms of who is going to be compensated when we are trying to use these resources for commercial purposes in those cases where there is overlap jurisdiction.
Either Vinod or Anilji, would you like to dwell upon the question? Your microphone is mute. Unmute the microphone, Anil.
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, actually, Dr. Bawa said about ownership of resources. Presently, what we take is that ownership per se is of the communities. If it is in the forest areas, as far as compensation is concerned, value of the resources will go to the forest. But as far as benefit sharing is concerned, which is a minuscule percentage, because the community has been involved in overall conservation of those resources, that has to come to the community. And before that, there is one levy of collection fee also. That collection fee also has to be by the biodiversity management committees. So collection fee has to be biodiversity management committees, and then benefit sharing, apart from the cost of resources, will be the organization which is owning the resources. If it is coming from the forest, cost will go to the forest. Means compensation of cost will be given to the forest. Or if it is fisheries, it will be given to the fisheries. But benefit sharing as well as collection of charges has to come to the community. I don't know whether I'm able to clear this out.
My point was that very often the biodiversity is distributed in a manner that it covers the geographical boundaries, which sort of define communities. It's spread over many communities. It is spread over forest areas versus agricultural areas, and so on and so forth. So I think, as it was already pointed out, even the simple things become very difficult to implement. And when there is such complex issues, I think the problem gets multiplied. So all I'm saying is that I think you have a huge challenge in your hands, and I'm not sure, how it is going to be resolved. I think there are answers, but to what extent these answers are very practical in terms of implementation, it's not very clear.
Yes, but actually there are issues, but the state biodiversity boards have big challenge on that, but they have been able to do to some extent. As I explained already, resources in the forest belong to the forest department. If those resources are to be utilized by some stakeholders, if there is mutually agreed terms, cost-wise, that will go to the forest. But as far as benefit sharing comes, that community has been involved in conserving those resources, that will come to the communities.
Okay. Right. So anyone else go ahead and ask your questions? Yeah, Aparna, you are raising the hand. Unmute your microphone. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So, sir, I had a question for Mathur, sir. We have seen after the PBR exercise, many communities are aware, and many panchayats would now like to take up conservation efforts. Are there any funds available at panchayat level for this, sir?
Funds for whom?
Should I repeat?
No, I
Yeah,
understand the
funds.
question. I'm asking fund, who needs those funds, for whom you are saying?
Sir, for the panchayats to do biodiversity management conservation efforts in their area, what kind of funds will be available for them and from which agencies?
See, as of now, we have not reached to that stage. because the PBR formation is taking place, and the whole idea behind PBR is that we must know what our resources are and what part can be traded and what resource can be generated. So we must have a sense of the potential resource first, and then the law is very clear that once the resources are raised, they can be shared and retained by the BMC in certain proportion. So yes, certainly they will be available as and when we reach that stage.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So I have a very direct question, and this is to both Anil and to Vinod. Process of drafting the amendment is on. How likely is the timeline? Soon or how far?
Goyal sir first.
Okay. As I explained, the process for regulations, I think this should not be taking much time because it is already passed through different stages. So, and I think it is good progress has already been made. Biodiversity rules also, because those rules are based on the existing provisions of the Act, that also should not be taking much time because it is a simple process. Once those are approved by the authority and by the ministry, then it's only a question of getting by Ministry of Law and notification. But as I explained, amendment to the Act is a big drawn process, long drawn process. It can take from 1 year to many years, which is beyond our imagination.
Okay.
Because this has to go to political bosses. This can take any number of months and years. It has just passed one stage.
Okay.
It is only recommendation by a committee. All other stages also to be crossed.
And Vinod, from the point of view of a biodiversity administrator at a national level, at the helm of affairs of biodiversity, what impact the new amendments will have in biodiversity governance and administration?
I would say far-reaching.
Somebody's microphone is creating a wave. I think if you are, you need to. Yeah. Go ahead, Vinod. Yeah.
See, I started that the intent of this entire amendment is to rectify or remediate the inconveniences which are there to various implementers and users. Now, having said that, we have to keep two things in mind. The resource itself should get protected. That is my first responsibility, conservation of a resource. And then comes the benefit arising from that resource. So, I am quite confident because we have done so much consultation and whatever good ideas have come, we have taken on board and we have tested them to this two tests that any idea if implementation causes the deterioration of the resource is no good. And second, if it causes more hurdles in implementation, it is also no good. So I am very hopeful that with churning of so much effort which has gone in for the last 1 year or so, we should be able to do that. And as I said, there is a strategy behind our effort. I can spell it out to this group that while, as Goyal have said, amending the Act is a long-drawn process, but amendment of rules, regulations, and guidelines is not such long-drawn. So if we were to look at a scale of 10, 7 or 8 problems out of 10 which people are facing can be fixed or will be fixed once we are able to amend the rules, regulations, and guidelines. 2 or 3 will still remain, which of course we will have to wait till the Act gets amended. So I would say that I place a lot of hope, and that is the reason why I keep pushing that with a little push, if things can happen in a much better way and faster and quicker way, why not? So definitely I will place a lot of hope and speed in both the things that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vinod. And I'll come back to Ramesh one more time. Ramesh, now that we've moved into the question and answers, as a law practitioner, how do you think the new amendments or the new modifications will simplify the process of arbitration or simplify the process of judicious use or sustainable use of the resources, and will also help prevent misuse of the resources?
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Well, just to put it in one or two sentences, I must say that the problem is not exactly with the design of the law or the way the law is crafted, because no law is perfect. And that's exactly the reason why the highest court of law on a number of occasions came up with purposive interpretation. But it's actually the wherewithal to make it work. And that is something that's conspicuous by its absence when you're actually looking into those who are under an obligation to comply with that, not with the implementer, but with those under an obligation to comply, putting in so many hurdles in the way. And one of the ways whereby you can achieve it is to ensure that the biodiversity management committees are set up, number one. Number two, their capacity is built. They're set up and constituted in such a manner as has been prescribed in the form of guidelines by NBA. And it is not just any body or any entity that can come together as the Biodiversity Management Committee and do whatever they want to. So it's a very highly responsible thing. And if you take it to the grassroots, I'm quite sure that the governance would be far more stronger, and the basic objectives of both CBD and the Biodiversity Act would be achieved in a far more meaningful way than what it is now. Right now, toward the end of my presentation, I was about to mention that biodiversity law and the authorities under it have become a Cinderella law in a whole scheme of the working of the legal system in India. I think that from Cinderella, it should become the angel which would deliver, definitely to deliver us from the kind of pandemonium that we have gotten into, to the pandemic that we are passing through, a microorganism causing so much of havoc in our lives. To recover and reclaim the last ground itself is a big challenge. The very strength of the biodiversity law is the law of precaution, the principle of precaution. And the strength of the biodiversity law is in biosafety. These have to be strengthened. And only then you can really think of this law getting a real new lease of life. Any number of amendments that we attempt to, and the time that's going to be taken over a period of time would actually accelerate the process of loss of whatever that we are left with. I think with that word of caution, as a law academic, I just would like to submit that this is something that we need to really take it far more seriously. Talking about biodiversity is easiest, but making it work is a real challenge, and on which the very future of humanity rests. So that's how I look at it.
Okay, that's a very positive to hear from the law practitioners. You know, often the law practitioners are the ones who will find pitfalls in the laws, but I see there are a lot of synergy, and whatever is being built up into the amendments have come through a lot of churning in Vinod's word. It's actually a Sagar Manthan in kind of sense, you know. But I will go to Jeet Singh ji. Before that, I'll ask the floor. If there are any questions, please come forward. We are about 8 to 9 minutes into the session. So we would like to stick to the time because discipline is required for biodiversity conservation, I believe. So any questions from any of the people? Yes, Amit, go ahead.
My question is to our keynote speaker and all the panelists. See, we are working in a country now. Right now, we have dealt with in the discussions that the same resources is empaneled with two different acts. In an area where I'm working, it is Gadchiroli of Maharashtra State. So there are strongly the communities who are implementing Forest Rights Act, and on the same time there is a Biodiversity Act too. So my question is that as per the BD Act, it is stated that every local body shall constitute a biodiversity management committee, and here we see that a BMC is constituted at the Gram Panchayat level, and at a Gram level, there are 2 or 3 different villages in a Gram Panchayat. So, as per the Forest Right Act, every village has its own community forest right. So, there is a overlapping of these 2 acts on the same resources. Here, the forest. So, my question is, in the near future, can't we merge or create a synergize between these 2 laws, where the people will get a clear-cut instructions to implement these acts, either anyone or both, in a proper synchronization?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I would go to Vinod or Anil. Both of you would like to address this question.
Goyal sir first.
I totally agree with Amit. These are the issues which are being troubling the field officers like Jeet Singh. I think we have not reached to that stage where these problems have been brought to the notice and some solutions were sought. But these are the real issues. You are correct that under Forest Right Act or even PESA Act, each Gram Sabha can have their own say and community resources are there. But under BD Act, we have provision only under the Panchayat, that only Panchayat can have the BMC. So these are the issues which are, when those are coming up, those are to be sorted out. And definitely synergy is required. I think I'll request even Mr. Jeet Singh also, if he has faced any such issue in the field.
Jeet Singh ji? Yeah.
Such issues are certainly coming up, and particularly in the tribal belt, whether the Forest Right Act, PESA Act, and Biodiversity Act also. But now the synergy between the various organizations, because the organization is, the community is again the same, and if there is somebody who can mediate properly and make them understand that the resource belongs to you, even if you are using some rights, they can exercise it, and some of the benefit sharing can be done with the BMC also. So I think with the common resources pooling, the benefits ultimately will flow to the society only. But this, I think, again, is a understanding between various act implementation. Possibly people like Amit, they are there at the implementation stage, so they can make community understand that how far they can stretch their rights over the other. So that will help for the time being in implementation of various acts.
Vinod?
As Goyal sir said, that these are some very fine points of law which need to be synergized and worked upon. But it will be, I can say, on the lighter side, very difficult for the 2 acts to get merged. That won't happen, at least in our lifetime, that PESA and the BD Act gets merged. But we will definitely find some solution that how the ownership issue and the benefit sharing issue needs to be resolved at that level in a very practical way. So yes, there will be difficulties, but we need to keep talking and see that what is the best way in arriving at a solution which is acceptable to both from the point of view of both the laws and more to the people. See, it is ultimately the people who have to accept any provision or any benefit which flows from either of the 2 laws.
Okay, I think that answers your question, Amit, and you couldn't have got answers from all 3 of them in one go than
yes,
to have this platform.
I think Ramesh sir wanted to answer something. Ramesh sir.
Yeah, just one quick observation. I perfectly agree with you that the synergies of the working of all these laws, PESA, the Forest Rights Act, and the Biodiversity Law should converge and bring in that kind of a symphony of making the law work. But in terms of exercise of rights under the Forest Rights Act is not exactly the same as the ones that are conferred under the Biodiversity Act. And that way there are no overlaps. Only thing is you need to really bring the biodiversity management committees become a reality. Then only the seeming apparent overlaps would go. And we are dealing with two different jurisdictions. One is the forest one, the other one is outside the forest area. And that which is outside the forest area, the biodiversity law would actually rule the roost, because the two laws are supposed to be complementary to each other in their working, and so it does not brook up any conflict between the two. That's where the current state exists. But I quite agree with you that there has to be the synergy between all these laws, or they have to be collapsed into one to make the laws come alive.
Okay, so we are almost at the close of our session. One last opportunity, going once, going twice, going thrice. Oh, Kamal, yes, you picked up the last bit. Go ahead. You need to unmute your microphone, Kamal.
This has been a very, very useful discussion, I think, for all of us who are not really deeply involved in the legal framework for conservation of biodiversity. I think the point I wanted to make is biodiversity, we are very, very rapidly losing biodiversity, a point made by Dr. Mathur right in the beginning. And I think the Biodiversity Act has been there for some time, for more than a decade. I think it might be time to assess to what extent the Biodiversity Act has promoted conservation, to what extent the Biodiversity Act has promoted equitable benefits, to what extent the Biodiversity Act has promoted, I think I think I said earlier, benefit sharing and sustainable use of resources. It could be that maybe the problems are not really so much with the Act. Maybe the problems are not with the legal framework, but the problem lies somewhere for which the legal framework needs to be modified. And I think such an assessment, I think at a national level, I believe would be very, very good for those, for all of us, who are interested in conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity.
Completely in tune with your thoughts, Kamal, on that. I'm sure both Vinod, Anil Goyal ji and Ramesh would agree with that as well. I think laws are there. It's just that awareness, first place, sensitization, and then judicious use and implementation of that is also important. So with that very wonderful closing thought, Kamal, we come to an end of this session. I do take opportunity to thank all the panelists, Dr. Vinod Mathur, the chairman of the National Biodiversity Authority, Anil Goyal ji, the chairman of the committee that is looking at the amendment to the law, the legal visionary like Ramesh from the National Law School of India, and the member secretary of the Maharashtra State Biodiversity Board, and all the panelists who have been on this call. We have been very successful to start on time and close 1 minute later than the time, because we said we will not go beyond 90 minutes. But I think this has been an excellent forum. Thank you very much for consenting to my request to come. And please do join for tomorrow. We are talking an amazing, interesting topic tomorrow, the urban biodiversity and citizenry behavior. So tomorrow, Ravi Chelam, a good friend from MetaSpring Foundation, is giving a keynote address. Then we have Aparna talking about the ethicals and values. Then we have a very young guy from University of Texas talking about the go green or don't go green kind of conflict. And then we are bringing in an advertising specialist on talking about how do we sensitize the urbanites about the biodiversity in their near spheres. So do join in tomorrow. The recordings of this session will be made available on social media platforms in next 30 minutes. I do take a moment to thank my colleagues, Jitendra, Aparna, Amit, and many others, Pankaj Koparde, who helped in putting this together. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 7 o'clock Indian Standard Time. So till then, goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, sir.